I'm standing now in the chapel, quite close to the vault, where, to everyone's surprise, 12 months ago we found two bodies that turned out to be those of Christopher and Mary Boone. One of the most interesting early references to Lee can be found in the 17th century diaries of John Evelyn. There we see a reference to how impressed he was by an avenue of lime trees in the estate of Lee Place, which is where Christopher and Mary lived. He also commented on a young avenue of plane trees running along Lee High Road and up Brandram Hill, one or two of which have survived to this very day, though the rooks, which famously inhabited their upper branches in the 18th and 19th centuries, were said to have left the area when trams, routes 45 and 45A, first arrived on Lee High Road 100 years ago. Christopher Boone was born in Taunton, Somerset in 1616 and moved with his wife Mary to London in the early 1670s. He referred to himself as a successful merchant and became a commissioner of the East India Company. Having made a fortune from wool, Christopher decided to build on Lee Place estate and endow 4 dwellings for the elderly poor, a schoolroom for 12 children, and a chapel for the spiritual well-being of young and old. He was a liveryman of the Merchant Taylors' Company, and he set up a charity, with the company the principal trustee to administer these almshouses, school and chapel. With the support of the clergy of St. Margaret's, they sustained this charitable endeavour and twice-weekly services in the chapel for almost 200 years. Before, in 1877, new Victorian almshouses were built on a site half a mile east along Lee High Road. The original almshouses and school were demolished, and only the 17th century chapel survived.
A number of interesting things have taken place in the chapel throughout the years. One particular incident in 1813, a horse and cart travelling from Eltham at considerable speed was unable to negotiate the sharp corner and crashed through the door of the chapel to the astonishment of those at worship.
The Victorian brickwork, which forms most of the external part of this west elevation, serves as a 21st century reminder of the fact that the chapel was part of a much larger complex. In that year, the surviving and now freestanding chapel became a reading room and a library for the residents of the local almshouses. It continued to fulfil that role for a further 68 years, until in 1945, just after the Second World War, it fell into disuse.
The last service in the chapel was on Victory in Europe Day, 1945, when the old rush-bottom chairs were once again brought into use. The rector, Canon Bradle Johnson, who conducted the service, told me of how the proceedings were frequently interrupted by necessity for him and for the matron to extricate elderly ladies from the seats of chairs, the bottoms of which had rushed out.
For the first 145 years of its existence, this chapel stood in what were the grounds of the Boone's family home, Lee Place. These grounds straddled what is now Lee High Road. Lee Place itself was on the southern edge of the estate, near today's Manor House Library. Since 1824, the chapel has formed part of the grounds of the Merchant Taylors' almshouses, which were built that year 100 yards to the north. At the time, the Lee Place estate was divided by the new Lee High Road turnpike and sold off in lots, and Lee Place, the house, was demolished. These Merchant Taylors' almshouses survive today in their elegant and well-maintained grounds and have been providing accommodation for 24 elderly residents for 183 years.
I've been down into the chapel and seen inside, but of course, being in the state that it is, we could only just go inside the doorway.
The chapel was, even in the 1950s, sadly deteriorating, but of course, as nothing has been done in the intervening half-century, the situation now is a deplorable one.
For several years now, the Blackheath Historic Buildings Trust has been working very hard to raise the necessary £550,000 to repair and conserve the chapel, bring it back into use and give it a community focus. The chapel is one of only 2 Grade 1 listed buildings within the borough of Lewisham and is at the top of the London Buildings at Risk Register maintained by English Heritage. With the help of generous support from English Heritage, the Heritage Lottery Fund, the Merchant Taylors Company, the Borough of Lewisham and local residents, the necessary money has now been raised. Also, the Trust has recruited Research Design, a small local firm of architects, as prospective tenants and project architects. And plans have been finalised for the repair and conservation work to start before the end of 2007, this year, and to be completed during 2008. And for the chapel to be brought back into sustainable use, partly as an architect's studio and partly as a small exhibition space, open to the public, illustrating a range of subjects focused on architectural and design themes.